We're here to help those who want to get better for whatever reason. And that's part of living uniquely as only humans can do. Otherwise, we'd just be living like animals.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello.
I can see some good chat already starting in the chat there. Great to see you, David. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I very much look forward to our discussion that's about to come up.
Excellent. I think most people that have joined us right now and that are saying hello in the chat have definitely come across your name, because these are people that are on the MSc program that we run. And your book is one of the reading materials that they are given, so people are very familiar with this. You're also very prominent within the psychological world anyway. But what I'd like to do to open this up and get things going is to find out who David Matsumoto is in your own words, because I can take all of the blurb off your website and we can look at Wikipedia, but I'd like you just to give us a bit of an insight into who is David Matsumoto. So where have you come from and where are you now and what are you up to?
Well, first of all, thank you again for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you, two of you, and that guy named Cliff, and your students and audience wherever they are in the world. Yeah, so it's a tough question because I don't like speaking about myself, and yes, you could read the bio that we've got prepared. My office has prepared, and it makes me entirely embarrassed to sit around when people read that thing off, But there's so many ways to describe myself. I guess I'm just an ordinary guy who just keeps his nose to the grindstone for a lot of years, and I'm very blessed to be here and have accomplished whatever I've been able to accomplish. And it's not only because of whatever I've done, but because of the graciousness and the goodness of the many people who have been in my path and have opened up doors for me. I am born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I grew up there until I was graduated high school. I had the good fortune to go away from Hawaii, very far away. I went to the University of Michigan for a 4-year college. I don't remember exactly why I applied and why I went, except I think it was the school that was. Of course, it's a great school, but it was also the school that was the farthest away from home I could get, which is kind of weird because I'm such a homebody kind of person, Anyway, I was fortunate to study psychology there, and I actually had a double major in Japanese studies as well. And then I graduated from U of M about 150 years ago, and was able to go to the. Please don't look that up. That's actually a joke. I came here to the San Francisco Bay Area for graduate school, where I did my PhD in clinical psychology, of all things, at the University of California at Berkeley. Excuse me. I had the good fortune to meet with Paul Ekman, as your program knows very well, and study with him throughout my doctoral program. I finished my PhD. I finished my master's in 1983 and my PhD in 1986. And then I was very fortunate to land a job still in this area, which is very rare in the United States to land a job where in the area in which you got your terminal degree. So I was very fortunate to do that. I was at a private clinical psychology school from 1986 to 1989 as assistant professor. And then I moved over to San Francisco State from 1989 till this day where I'm there. It's 33 years that I've been at San Francisco State. And I think everybody knows I do research on emotion and nonverbal behavior and culture. Throughout all of this time, I've been very fortunate to work with many, many, many people, great people who have helped me along with my career and helped me to publish whatever I published, to do the research on whatever I've done and whatnot. Aside from that, to answer your question, to tell you the truth, I think many of your people know I do judo. I've done judo since I was 7 years old, so that must be 1967. And wow. Now some of you are doing the math. I am 63 soon, And I've done judo continuously, and I've had the good fortune to have great instructors who helped me develop some degree of discipline in my life and help me manage my time and never give up on whatever I was doing. And so I can't I can't we can have a whole talk about judo, but to tell you the truth, and not about emotion science. And but I can't attribute enough how much judo has done for my life to give me the strength and the discipline and the perseverance to get through and do whatever I've been able to do. I have a dojo here in California. It's called the East Bay Judo Institute, where I was the head instructor until 2013 or so. I then turned over the reins of the head instructor to one of my students, and we are very fortunate to have many other instructors there. And I was fortunate to be a coach, a national coach for the United States from 1989 to 2000. I was the head coach of the 1996 Atlanta Olympic judo team and the 2000 Sydney Olympic judo team. I was a member of the International Judo Federation from 1998 to 2007. So I was in Athens as well. I had and Beijing, where my daughter competed as an athlete there. I had athletes in the heat, so to speak, until London, actually, near where you guys are, in 2012. And then I retired from coaching because that is a lot of work being an Olympic coach. And so anyway, all of which, by the way, is volunteer. It was in addition to whatever I was doing with the rest of my life. And so in academics. But I've been retired from judo coaching, but I still keep up my judo practice to the extent that my body can. And so that's a long answer to your question. Today, I still do research. I still teach a little bit. I run a company called HumanTel, as you can see there. There, wherever the moniker is. And yeah, I still try to keep up with the young guys in judo. So I think that's probably a more complete description of me than I probably ever gave anywhere else, to tell you the truth.
Fantastic. That's great. And I think much of what you've talked about in that introduction, particularly some of the other elements around martial arts and your research generally, we're going to cover off. And we've got quite a few questions that we'd like to put to you. But yeah, I think we'll come back to some of the points you've just mentioned in that introduction. So thank you very much. And again, thanks very much for joining us.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I actually just want to circle back to judo, actually, because
Okay.
as I was looking into the work you've done, and I mean, you are very modest in what you've actually achieved in judo. I mean, what some people might not know is you actually was inducted into the Hall of Fame within judo, and it got me searching around because I'm very new to it, and what I was learning was judo is as much to do with what happens in the dojo as it is to do with what happens outside the dojo. And I was wondering whether there's any life lessons you've learned in your journey within judo that you could share with us that we can actually use in
Sure.
the real world.
Well, yeah, thanks a lot for that. I mean, there's so many life lessons. Judo and many sports are many things for many people. I think judo and martial arts, if done a certain way, are different than most sports because it should have a personal growth aspect to it. Not only in your physical abilities, of course, whatever sport you do, there should be a growth in your physical abilities and the associated the psychology that's associated with that, like self confidence and grit, for lack of a better term. I think judo is different than a lot of different sports and activities if done, in a quote unquote good way. And I think that there's so many peripheral values like the development of perseverance, as I mentioned earlier, some discipline, a lot of discipline. But there's also the courage, the friendship, the respect, the humility that I think are important values and behaviors that are instilled in people um, as they learn judo. And I say that with while acknowledging the sportification aspect of judo, especially in the Olympics, has made it easy for lack of a better term, prima donnas to exist in the sport aspect of judo as well as every other sport. But in everyday dojos out there around the world, there's these other more beautiful aspects of judo, I think, is occurring, and is teaching children as well as adults these kinds of very important things that are great life lessons. And I'm very fortunate because I have, from an academic standpoint, people say that I've got an envious, let's say, publication record. And again, I'm very fortunate about that. But I don't think that that's any better, for example, than any other person. Any other, if we stay in the academic world, that's not it. My record is not any better than an academic who has no publications, who is out there teaching students and affecting people's lives and building relationships and helping impart knowledge as well as building other kinds of things. I mean, every other teacher out there is equally, if not more valuable than any publication that I've ever had. To tell you the truth, my wife is a special ed teacher in elementary school, and I think what she does is more valuable into society than what I do. And I think every elementary school teacher is more valuable than most university professors, to tell you the truth, because that's where a lot of important things are occurring, as well as within the family. I think whatever things are being taught in families are the most important things about what that is, what we can impart to children, and even beyond that, listen, my father didn't make it through sixth grade, and he was a plumber for the rest of his life. But that man had a lot of wisdom. My first judo instructor was a sheet welder who I think graduated high school, but nothing beyond. But that man had a lot of wisdom, and there's a lot of people with no education who had everyday jobs that've got a lot of wisdom that I think have great lives and have great contributions to the world. And I think they are as much as, if not more valuable than any kind of publication I could create or a book I could write or those kinds of things. And so I'm sorry, I'm starting to pontificate here, but that's what I think. I'm very fortunate to have the publication record I do and the knowledge that I have about emotion and nonverbal, which is great. I mean, it is totally great. But there's many good people out there who do an amazing thing for all of us. And then lest I mention those who will keep us safe and out of harm's way, like law enforcement and the military and then first responders of all kinds. I mean, bless them for doing all of that.
Absolutely. I mean, that final point is actually something I wanted to ask you about, because we know a lot of your work is with the kind of security and police organizations over in America,
Yes.
and the responsibility that comes with training those people.
Yes.
And one of the things we've seen probably expand more recently is a lot of the criticism of the science, and we would say unfair criticism. How does that feel to you to read those kinds of attacks on what we would say is actually solid science?
Well, how does it make me feel? Given that this is a public and open forum, I've got to watch what we say. I mean, it doesn't make me feel great, but to tell you the truth, I've been seeing the same kinds of criticisms levied against this area since the 1980s. And to tell you the truth, it's a lot of the same arguments packaged in different ways. And thus, I think some people get something out of having the argument and not wanting a resolution to the argument. And that's truly how I think and feel about this area, as well as other areas of psychology in research that have these kinds of debates. There's not many of them, to tell you the truth. And emotion science happens to be one of them. And, I see the same arguments packaged in different ways for literally 40 years. Doesn't make me feel good to see them, but what I'm concerned about, if I want to circle back to the origin of your question, you know what? If we want to just have academic debates among academics where we argue and then we go back and we just sit in our universities and do whatever we're going to do, it's fine. But like you, I, and a few others, we try to use the knowledge from science and the skills that we can generate from science to help people do better at their jobs, in their lives. That can occur in so many ways, right? Like, I'm going to take a little tangent here and what really locked this in for me, well, I remember this incident standing out in the early 1990s when I was just, and I say it with the air quotes, right? Just an academic wanting to do research and whatnot. And I remember walking into, I don't remember exactly where this was, but I do remember walking into an organization where I saw them lay out my book, one of my books at the time, and a bunch of my articles, and proceed to explain to me how they were creating a training program in their organization based upon what I was doing. And I remember being so shocked at that time, thinking, "Oh my God, people can take actually what we write about and say, and actually intervene in people's lives." And then after that, I worked with the American Psychological Association on how to infuse the curriculum for clinical psychologists with culture-related issues. And there again, it dawned on me that, boy, you can take these academic things and actually help others intervene in other people's lives. And that was the clinical psychology. The first example was an industrial organizational psychology example, and then there's the clinical psychology example. And then it thought to me, geez, we got to watch what we're saying and doing, because we can affect people's lives. And so I've actually had this. My first thought in my mind when I just said there was this immense burden on my shoulders, but I do think that we academic psychologists should feel some responsibility about what we say, do, and write, because somewhere along the line, as psychologists, it's not just something that's going to be if it were only something that were filed in a library and nobody cared about it anymore, it's just some debate among. It's basically philosophy, right? We're just debating among each other. That's one thing. But if what we're writing and studying and saying can actually impact on people's lives, whether it's clinical psych or law enforcement or military or the legal profession or medicine or healthcare or whatever it is, then I think we have the burden to get it right. And so now I'm going back to your question. What do I feel about when I see these debates? Well, let me think about how I can describe how I feel. I feel offended, not by those who raise those things, not by those who raise those questions, because I think raising questions is good for academia. But when you get to the point of where you've got training managers and policymakers of people, let's say in law enforcement or a hospital or someplace like that, who are not necessarily scientists, and they don't have to know the science, but they can read about the science and kind of get it and then make decisions for training and application, and that they then may be misled by whatever headlines are occurring that day, that I feel very difficult about, because I want those people to have the best information possible so that we can help them do their jobs better. And I feel very conflicted about the way that occurs. And I've had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful career in academics, but for the last 20 years, as you guys know, I've decided it's not as much important for me to do more basic science and to publish more papers. It's really not. I mean, I do it. I like it. I do think it's an important thing, but what's equally, if not more important for me at this point in my career, is to translate that science to help practitioners do their things better, whatever the practitioner is, in whatever field they're in. I mean, I personally have limitations of what fields I will work in. And you mentioned I do a lot of work with law enforcement and the national security apparatus. But whatever field anybody chooses to be in, like many of your graduates and you and your group, we want to give the best information so that they can be helped and they can do their jobs better. And because I have that feeling, I don't feel great when I see the impact that those debates have on policymakers, because they can make what I think are incorrect decisions about how to do their jobs better. And so that's how I'm taking a long-winded route to explain myself about that question. But I think it's a big problem, to tell you the truth. It's a big issue. You can't expect the policymakers and the training managers to be scientists. But I wish there were better, um, more constructive ways of presenting the science to them.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I know we couldn't agree with you more on that. And you've touched on something just that I've been thinking about lately, as far as not just in academia, but I think just in every aspect of people's lives, is it's so easy when we're distracted or we're being bombarded with information to kind of latch on to like the loudest voice or the most succinct way of putting things.
Sure.
And you are, I mean, you can see from your research, you're very data focused, data driven. But we're seeing that the world is maybe paying less attention to the finer details. Is there anything we can do in our field to try and combat that deviation to headlines as opposed to actually diving into the detail, so we can get that argument across more effectively?
Well, yes, with the caveat that I think in the sense that we're both doing the same thing right and have the same goals, that we know what we can change and what we can't. I mean, this is not. It's a social issue, right? I mean, society and stay away from the field of emotion science. Look at society as a whole. You know, a lot of minds are affected and influenced by headlines on this thing here, which you can't see because with my phone, right,
Yeah.
and social media, and that's unfortunate. I think what we want, how I approach that, and probably is how you're approaching it, but I don't want to make assumptions, is one by one, whether it's a student in school or trainees in our program, one by one, teach them to be or model for them how to be a more critical thinker of whatever is being fed them, including whatever I say, because I'm more than happy to sit with anybody and talk about the science and those debates you mentioned before, and talk about the merits of those. But it takes an inquisitive mind to be able to do that, and I think it's us one by one helping open people's minds to actually be more critical, a little skeptical, not pessimistic, but skeptical and critical, and then open to being able to have discussions, and then people can make their own decision. I mean, I'm willing to have that discussion. I can't change social media, and I can't change how mass media create headlines, but I think we can do it on our scale, and I think and I think that's where I end up with this particular issue. I hope to pump out what you probably don't see coming out of me a lot for the last 10, 15 years of my career is engaging in the debate publicly, whether it's articles that I've written. I mean, I could write articles about that, and I could do all these other kinds of things, but I don't, because for me, I've just decided I will continue to produce whatever data I will produce, and I will continue to influence those I can continue to influence, because I think that argument is a lost cause. To tell you, I think engaging in that argument is a lost cause in a public forum like that, unless I'm asked to do it in a public forum.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Excellent. And that argument is around, clearly one of the biggest arguments is around universality. In general, that's where one of the biggest ones is. And I think that's some of the areas that some of our students are very interested in, obviously the universality side, and they're interested in emotion and deception and all of those wonderful things.
Sure.
They're interested in so much, and they're currently going through that process of trying to find an area in this wonderful field that you've looked at, and the breadth of what you've covered, and that we focus on. And they're still trying to get an idea of what is it that I want to focus on for 2 years of my life.
Sure.
What advice would you give someone that's now coming through an MSc program and trying to think, okay, this is a wonderful field. How do I find something that I want to research? My research project. I've got to have a research project.
Okay.
What should I have? What advice would you give to students?
Okay. Well, let me give my answer by giving you first a little background about how I answered the question myself. First of all, I had no idea what I was doing in my life, academic life. Um, I remember the days when I was in graduate school, having no idea what I was going to do for my master's thesis, and then once that was done, having little idea of what I was going to do for my dissertation. After that, having no idea about what I would actually focus on in my research for 5 years, 10 years. I remember the days when I remember that I thought, I wonder if I would, this is past my PhD, I wonder if I'll ever write a book one day about something. I remember after my PhD, maybe 5 years after my PhD, looking back at what I wrote when I was in graduate school, because I was very fortunate to write articles when I was in grad school and shortly thereafter, thinking, "Oh my God, I can't imagine, I can't fathom why I wrote that and how I wrote it that the way. That was terrible." I remember thinking 5 or 10 years past my PhD about the biggest lessons that I learned in research was how not to do it because of all the mistakes I made. And I'm taking a long way of this is for me because I may be or probably am very different from others, but I think part of the issue, especially with MSc students and student early career, wherever you are in early career, I would not put the onus of the big question in front of me. What is it that I want to do about this huge thing? I mean, it's a huge topic to begin with, and I would just get rid of the onus of having a big question in your shoulders, and look at what are the three questions you are interested in right now. What are those three? And it could be anything. And once you land on three, I would go and look at some literature, the latest articles on whatever those three topics are, and just do a little reading. And I would refine the top three based upon your reading. But I would time limit it because there's also the case, my students included, who every time they read, they come up with something different. And you can just do this for about 10 years. And you don't want to do that for 10 years, right? I would time limit that and say, okay, after a certain amount of time, here's the three, and here's what I think I want to do that I'm interested in. Just find something that you're interested in that's currently being studied, or to some degree. And if you come down with three, and if you just think through what is a research question for each of these three topics that would be interesting to examine, and have advisors like you guys and many other people who you can discuss with and refine those your thinking about it, eventually you're going to narrow it down, because something's going to be, yeah, that's not doable, something over here is just too esoteric, okay, this sounds good. And you know what, nothing is perfect because research is not perfect. Research, we don't ever study emotion, to tell you the truth. For example, if you want to be in the world of emotion, no one studies emotion. We study, for example, a self-report of emotion on a little scale over here done at a certain time. Everything's contextualized. If you want to study facial expressions, nobody studies facial expressions because there's so many ways to study facial expressions. You're going to study one particular expression or one particular movement or one particular this in that particular context. And so everything is so specialized or so weeded down in research. And that's the nature of research, because we got to shrink it down to something that's bite-sized. It's a representation of emotion, but it's this bite-sized thing. So I would get rid of that onus of, this huge big thing. I just weed it down, and you end up with, okay, here's this question that I can work on, and just decide and work on that. And I guarantee you, at the end of it, you get an answer to that, and you find different ways of doing that, and you find different questions you want to pursue. And it's the process, not the outcome, that's really important in this. Because doing your first, second, or for me, first 20 studies was learning more about the process and how to be a better thinker about the research than whatever answer I learned at that particular time. And so I would take a little bit of the onus off people's shoulders like that and just engage in the process and gain satisfaction from that process.
Nice. And I mean, last time we spoke, actually, you was I think I asked you the question of what gets you up in the morning, and your response was writing for the most part. Is there anything you're currently working on right now?
Well, yeah, and let me step back. I mean, I got to link it to judo, right? Because I tell you, one of the ways in which judo grounded me was when I was younger. Of course, that's not now, but when I was younger, I was going to judo every night, except the weekends. The weekends were morning judo. But when you got to do something every night, and by the way, I didn't like judo when I was a kid. I did everything I could to get out of judo when I was a kid, and thank God for my father who just kept me in it, right? And anyway, so I had to go to judo, and then I wanted to go to judo, and it's every day, every night. And so I knew at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever that is every day, I'd have to be in a dojo working out. And what does that mean? So that sets a time for me that I can work backwards. For example, I'm not eating at 4 o'clock, because if you're eating at 4 and you're going to on the mat at 5, that's not a good scene. That 5:30 is not going to be a good scene for you, right? And so it sets when you're eating, and it sets what you're doing. And for me, I happen to be a morning person anyway, and so I just think more clearly when I'm in the morning. First thing in the morning. So I know for me, I'm thinking the clearest in the morning. Like many people, I'm not thinking clearly after lunch, right? And I know at 5 o'clock I'm hitting a dojo, and this is every day. And so thus, I had to write, because that's what I do. You're a researcher, you gotta publish something. And so I just said in my mind that I'd write every morning. And I've done this from graduate school. And I do this till this day, because I'm a boring person and I just keep my nose to a grindstone. I write every morning, 6 days a week, and some days it's an hour, some days it's a couple hours, some days it's a little more, but every day I make some kind of progress. Some days it's just doing lit search and writing notes about something. Some days it's spending 2 hours revising a paragraph. Some days it's just doing a brain dump, and I write 4 pages in 90 minutes. But every day I'm just doing something. And I find, for me, the process of doing it every day helps me to think better. I get up every morning accomplishing something. And over time, it's just helped me to be a better writer and thinker, and help me produce whatever I've been able to produce. So yeah, that gets me up every morning. Currently, I happen to be writing a paper on individual differences on risk taking, and things like that. But every day is different. Every day is different about the topic, or not every day. I'll be on a topic until I finish a certain amount, and then I'll go on. But over time, it's always different. I say that, however, with a grain of salt. I mean, I know a wonderful, wonderful, very close friend of mine who's also an academic in sports history, and he also has a wonderful productivity record of research. He is the entire opposite. And he just waits until the end and spends this marathon of time doing a whole bunch of stuff, and then produces a beautiful product at the end. I actually worked with him on a book project many years ago. And of course, it drove me nuts, because I'm a year out of deadline and I want to work on it every day. Whereas my friend he happens to be French. So my friend is, oh, let's go and have some wine today. Let's go and do this today. And it would drive me nuts. And I probably drove him nuts. And at the end, however, I don't know, and last 2 weeks or 1 month or whatever this is, boom, we're doing marathons. And the product he produced was beautiful, better than I ever could have done. And so I say that with a grain of salt. This is my way. But there's other ways. My advice to students is always find a way to be productive. What's not cool is not having a way everybody find a way. But yes, I am working on some topics right now, and about risk taking and other kinds of things. I do other kinds of writing about deception, as you know, and things. But every week or two, it changes.
Got you. And when you talk about writing like that, I mean, you've mentioned you're currently working on a paper,
Yeah.
but it almost sounds like it's therapeutic for you. I mean, how much would you say writing is actually you begin the process with an end goal in mind, and how much of it is just off the cuff for your own personal sake?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, to tell you that, for me, the therapeutic part of my activity for me is actually judo, because I can go like many people, right? I can go and have a workout, and judo is just different for me again, because it's not just physical. I mean, I can go downstairs and get on. I have as I mentioned, I have a little gym downstairs, and so I can get on a treadmill or get on a bike or do whatever and get a workout. But judo is different because when you're working with somebody, you got to be in the moment. I mean, you either get slammed or you slam somebody, right? Essentially, that's what's going to happen. And so all the cares in the world around me, which could occur while I'm writing, won't occur when I'm doing judo, because that's just a different thing for me. And so it's good for everybody to have something like that, I think. And it doesn't have to be every day. We just carve out amount of time where we can be blank. I don't know if blank is the right word, but just zone out from that. I don't mean zone out in drunkenness, but I mean zone out in some kind of mindful state. I think that's a good thing for me. So that the therapeutic part for me, it's fortunately it's judo, and then it's physical, so you can physically get rid of whatever, the physical aspects of whatever stress may occur throughout the day, and that for me, for writing, yes, the catharsis of finishing a paper, seeing it accepted for publication, seeing it in print, yes, that is good too. But as I mentioned before, I'm at a fortunate point in my life where I think I could be okay and never publish a paper again. I don't mean to say that to diminish the publication process. I think those who aspire to do that, I would say go for it. Just for me, because of where I am in my career, it's different, and I also feel great when I hear from the people that we've trained that they use something that we taught them that did something really well for them, whether it's
Yeah,
catch the crook or do this thing over there. I mean, when it's working, that's really cool too, right?
absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And you've obviously, when it comes to the amount of writing you've done, I think it's 400 or so pieces of academic work, and coming on for 200 peer-reviewed articles in that area. Out of all of that writing you've done, what would you say is something that you're most? Could you pick an area that you think you are most proud of, and for what reason?
Well, thanks for that. First of all, a caveat of all of that number, a whole bunch of them is conference papers where I was a co-author and other people were doing the bulk of the writing and the presentation and whatnot. So, but yes, I do have a bunch of books and peer-reviewed articles and whatnot. Yeah, and you know what? I've been asked this question before. No, I don't think I have a favorite, because everyone has a story behind it. Even the very first one, which was published in 81 or 82, it was my honors thesis back from the University of Michigan. I look back today and I have no idea how and why it was published, but it got published. But there's a story there, right? And it was a step in the process of my development, and for that reason, I personally don't have any favorite one, because they all have special meaning to me for some reason, shape, or form. The field, of course, has different ways of understanding meaningfulness, right? By citation indices. And so if you look at the field and citation indices, I guess the field likes my book, Culture and Psychology, a lot. I guess the field likes the photo image set known as JACFE a lot. And I can go down the citation index and just in order of whatever I produced, and that tells me what the field likes. But me personally, no. Everyone was a work that I put my best in at the time that is meaningful for that reason, I think. And you could point to any article that I've ever written, and I'll give you a story. And for me, the story is meaningful, and the people who were there were meaningful for me.
Okay, so on that point, we were actually just having a discussion before we came online,
Yeah.
and I claimed that you were the first person to write a peer-reviewed paper on microfacial expressions. And as I was saying it, I was like, I'm sure it was like 2000, which seems like not early enough. Can you tell us a bit more about that and when that was and how you became that first person?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. Although microexpressions have been discussed in the literature for decades, as you know, and everybody should know it was first discovered by psychologists named Haggard and Isaacs in 1966. And they wrote a chapter in, they were psychotherapists, and they did slow motion analyses of psychotherapy films. There were no videos at the time, where they wrote about what they called micromomentary expressions. So Haggard and Isaacs wrote about that in '66. Cogden and I think it was Osgood, but there was Cogden and Osgood wrote about it in 1967. Also, they were also doing psychotherapy research of families, and they also mentioned micromomentary expressions. I don't. They might have called it something different. Then, of course, Ekman's first mention of it was in 1969, where he actually referenced the Haggard and Isaacs paper. And so I believe the discovery being defined as the first writing of it, mentioning of it in writing, should be appropriately given to Haggard and Isaacs in 1966. But as everybody knows, it's been that the concept was popularized through other non-peer-reviewed writing since that time, even through the 2000s. And interestingly, there was no peer-reviewed study involving microexpressions for decades. The 2000 article was a study about what we called Jack Bart, which took the JACV images, the Japanese and Caucasian facial expressions of emotion images, and put them in a on VHS video. To tell you the truth, we had to edit these VHS videos where we presented them in micromomentary fashion, and we created different kinds of tapes with different speeds of the presentation to examine what format and what speed of presentation produced the best individual differences to create a test of microexpression recognition ability. So and there was a predecessor to all of this called the BART, the Brief Affect Recognition Test, which was published by Ekman and Friesen in 1974 in a chapter where they wrote about the BART, but they never published anything about the BART in a scientific journal. And so I was interested in creating a test for microexpression recognition ability. So I took the basic format of the BART, used the JACV images, and changed the format and the timing, and did, I think, 5 studies or so that we wrote up in that article, which was published in the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior. And if I knew we were going to talk about this, I could go downstairs and I would have pulled out the box with the actual VHS videotapes, because it's really interesting to see how that occurred. But because we used to do, there was no Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey. We bring people to a laboratory and pop in the tape, and they're all writing their responses on paper back in the day. And anyway, so the studies were probably done around 1998 or so. And as you know, there's a publication process where we're writing and we're defending in a journal until it's accepted. And anyway, it got published, and I didn't know at the time, to tell you the truth, the importance of that article. Looking back later on about the history of microexpressions, I then realized, oh my gosh, that's the first peer-reviewed article that involved microexpressions, and I happened to be the first author of that because I was driving that project. And so on that project, there's a bunch of students that I had in my laboratory at San Francisco State that were co-authors with me, because we did conduct 5 studies. But yes, that is correct. That was the first article about microexpressions.
And actually, to build on that as well is after hearing that, it got me thinking, and you're actually probably the first person to make micro expressions, and at least the understanding and the ability to perceive micro expressions in the modern sense of the word. So I know in the early days, working alongside Ekman, you were building the mix and the met and those tools.
Yeah.
And actually, I think they were the catalyst of what has become quite popular nowadays, certainly within our realms. And that seemed to be like the first one where it was actually about, can you teach people these
Yeah.
skills? And it
Yeah.
turns out you can.
Well, you're exactly right. So the results of that project that we just talked about led to the creation of MET. And because MET used the JACFI, Japanese and Caucasian facial expressions of emotion images, that then, so the paper and the project led to MET. MET, of course, got used quite a lot, and then we decided to update the images. And so Paul and I not just, but we engaged in a large project where we got a whole bunch of images. And to tell you the truth, you can't see it on my screen right now, but I've got a desk right over there where me and my staff laid out the thousands of images for the mix, and we were doing the selections right over there in the early 2000s. I can't remember exactly what the year was. And those images there that got selected there led to the mix, the sub-X, the various versions of mix and sub-X, and we've got the subtle expression stuff that we've got. But yeah, that there's a train of progression of all of that led to what we've got now. And then, of course, after that, there was another project that we did for the government where we got all kinds of other faces that were dressed up in different ways, where we got thousands of images there as well. And we actually converted a part of my dojo in El Cerrito over there as a photo studio, and we were taking photos, a lot of photos. And yeah, we did the selections over here as well on this table over here. That led to a number of the training courses that we got on the HumanTel site. But yes, so back to your question, there's a progression of all of this stuff and how it evolved from the science to practical things. And you mentioned about the ability to train people. We know that we can train them, but we never documented. We knew, but we didn't document in science whether the training effects were real, whether they were retained, and whether they led to differences in communication behaviors. And so that study was actually produced. We published that study in 2012, I think, it's called the evidence of training effect of microexpression or something like that. Was published in Motivation and Emotion. So that one's like in 2012. So you can see that the evolution of the science with the practice, interacting with the practice as we're going a long time here. And so, yes, back to your question. Yes. So that's all one line of progression.
Amazing.
Fantastic. And when it comes to, micro expressions, we can stay on that for another 3 hours, probably just talking about that. So micro expressions play a big part generally, expressions generally, but micro expressions being one part of that facial expression area that we discuss. And we can see that in normal day-to-day conversations. But one reason that people get involved with this area is for deception detection in a lot of those cases. Now, it is just one part of the communication features of a human being. And some of your research has looked at not just detecting deception, but more recently you looked at intention to deceive as well with regards to microexpression. Is that correct? So can you tell more about that?
Yeah, sure. I think you're referring to a study that we published just a couple of years ago. And of course, again, because of the publication lag, the studies were actually conducted maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Of course, when you're getting older, they all blur together anyway, but that's a different story. That study examined people's behavior when they were lying about their future intent to commit an act of to commit a malicious act or not. those kinds of lies are very interesting because most of the time, especially, for example, when we talk about investigators, investigators are talking with people most of the time about lies about something in the past. Like, tell me what you did last Friday night at 8 o'clock, something like that. And so those lies are embedded around memories. And we don't have to get into that much about it, but memories are encapsulated in our minds with cognitions, emotions, and sensations, and they're put together. I believe emotions are the glue of our memories. I believe that without emotions, facts and the past would just be floating around in our head, like in an aquarium. And emotions and sensations that we encode at the time of a memory kind of keeps the glue together there of all of these facts and memories. And that's why, one of the reasons why, when you're angry about something that's occurring right now, it's easier to remember all the other times you were angry about something. That's why when you are sad about something right now, it's easy to remember all the other times you're sad about something. And likewise with happy, and likewise with fear. And that's why, going back to anger, when people are arguing, this is something that typically happens, right? Something happens right now to tick me off, and I can express that. And while we're expressing ourselves, we are angry, and you can say, and that's why last week when you did this other thing, that you did this other thing, blah blah blah, and last year, blah 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 blah. And one of the reasons why those memories are connected because emotions are the glues of our cognitions. And thus, when we recall that, we're recalling all of that, and thus you can see microexpressions for many reasons. Something that is occurring in the future, an intention to occur in the future, is different. And so there's an open question as to what kinds of indicators may exist when people are lying or telling the truth about such things, their intentions in the future. And it's interesting, like in the study that you had mentioned, that just examining microexpressions, what we found was people, even when lying about their intention about the future, they produced microexpression, significantly more microexpressions than people were telling the truth. Now, well, part of the reason is not only because of the fact that people have memories, and I mean, recall of memories are different. I get that. So one would suggest that you'd expect less microexpressions. However, when people are lying, they also have other things going on in their head, right? Like, I don't want to be caught. I want to be successful in my lie. Oh my God, what am I going to do right now? What am I thinking? They got a lot of additional extra baggage going on. The baggage is both cognition and emotion, regardless of the fact that it's not a memory. They still got the other baggage going on. And what I think is occurring is that we're seeing output from the additional baggage. So the baggage never changes as long as you have stakes involved, right? The baggage doesn't change. It's just that what you're lying about is different. And so back to the study, yes, it was interesting to see that microexpressions occurred in the liars way more than the truth tellers. Another interesting thing about that study was, if you examine wow, I'm talking fast. If you examine the literature on lying, what you see a lot of studies do, mine included now, are one shot. Here's the difference between truth tellers and liars. Well, those are interesting comparisons. But what do investigators really need? They don't have a comparison of a group mean with another group mean. When you're an interviewer, whatever the context, you can be law enforcement, loss prevention, a physician. It doesn't matter who you're a hiring manager. You don't have the group mean comparison. You have that person. And so what you've got to rely on is baseline of that person and how they're changing from telling the truth to lying. And one of the limitations of the deception literature is that they're one-shot comparisons of truth tellers versus liars. And the comparison of means is not analogous to the comparison of the baseline to the same person. So in that study, one of the things that we did was compare the baseline of when those same people, when they were telling the truth to innocuous questions, and then what were they looking like when they were on the hot questions. There you find the very big increase in the microexpressions produced in the liars, but I think there was a decrease in the truth tellers. So that comparison, even though it's presented as a matter of fact in that study, I think is a big deal, because in the deception literature, they're all one-shot group comparisons between truth tellers and liars. Very few are baseline comparisons of the liars to themselves.
And actually, on that, it's this was I've got to give credit to my dad on this one. Is we always in the early days stuck with the 1/25th of a second on micro expressions.
Yeah. Oh,
and this is one of the things that you did on this study, is you changed the time frame to actually know it's half a second. And do you go half a second to a second? What is there a parameter where is there a threshold?
Oh man, this is a great question, and thank you for bringing it up, because popular press and some scientists have always said, they can occur as fast as 1/25th of a second, and I've always had skepticism about that for decades, because in the early days when I was working as a graduate student, even in Ekman's lab, we worked a lot on film, and film was filmed at 24 frames a second. And when we were back then working in 24 frames a second, I know that exactly. Everybody who works in film knows that 24 frames a second. And we're splicing film and doing all that stuff. And if film was at 24 frames a second back in the 60s,
there's nothing there.
One would wonder how somebody saw something at 1/25th of a second. Now, I say that, I know that some cameras way back when I believe it was in Europe, someplace, that were able to capture things at 1/25th of a second, but I don't believe those cameras were used in the original studies. So I always had a skepticism about this. Related to your question was some of the first studies of microexpressions published by Steve Porter and Leanne ten Brink in 2006 and 2008 and 2011. They used the 1/25th definition of a microexpression in their analysis. And they reported that they didn't find too many expressions, and thus the microexpressions did not differentiate between truth tellers and liars. And that's how some of the critics of this literature point to those studies and say, aha, you see, it was tested then, and they didn't find it. I agree with that. But if you take a step back, for decades, we have known that what the timing characteristics are of spontaneous facial expressions of emotion that do not have to be regulated. They go on the face and off the face between 0.5 of a second and 4 or 5 seconds. This is the normal time course of facial expressions of emotion that people spontaneously produce, where they don't have to modulate them. This is well-known fact. If we know that that's fact of how spontaneous facial expressions occur, to me, I then started thinking, well, if the lower edge is 0.5 of a second, I'm going to define, for research purposes, microexpressions that occur under 0.5 of a second. Because above 0.5 of a second could be a normal, non-suppressed facial expression of emotion. So then in that study, what we did was everything that's under 0.5 is a micro. Then what I wanted to do was to survey whether these things are actually occurring. So what we did was we timed them at 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, and 0.2 and below. And then we examined whether microexpressions were actually occurring at those times and whether they differentiated truth tellers and liars. So it was the first, to me, logically based survey of micro timing given a 0.5 threshold, given that we know that normal spontaneous expressions are starting at 0.5 to 4 or 5 seconds. And in that study, we showed that microexpressions under 0.2 of a second just don't occur very often. And that makes sense to me. That then corresponds with the Porter and ten Brink studies, where they measured it at 1/25th and they didn't find anything. Well, so we don't find anything either. But at 0.3, they do occur, and they do differentiate truth tellers and liars. 0.4, they also occur, and 0.5, they're occurring even more. So anything from 0.3 to 0.5, they occur, they're pretty reliable, and they differentiate truth tellers and liars. So that was the first time we were able to survey those various timings. Just again, a few more tangents. Back in the day, this is around 2010 or so, I actually had this study where I was able to buy some equipment, and I bought cameras that shot at 200 frames a second. 200 frames a second now. And because I wanted to see, okay, maybe these things may be occurring so fast that you don't see them on video. Video is 30 frames a second, right? And we got hundreds of participants on these cameras. They don't occur faster than 0.3 of a second. And so I'm pretty confident that nature, there's a natural biological reason why they're not occurring under 0.3. I think that's the time it takes to stimulus to process, for the facial nerve to activate, and for the muscles to respond. I think that's the fastest time.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
But you see,
coming on.
Sorry, you see, take that study. I don't know if I would have picked that as one of my favorites, but there's a story behind that, and I think the story is way more important than whether I mean, it's a great study, right? But whether
I mean, it literally changes the game. Like everything beyond that study is a new world.
Yeah, I kind of wish I had a list of every single study you've done here now, that I could just point one randomly and ask for the story. That's kind of what I want to do now. So, because we're talking about speeds of 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 of a second, clearly it takes practice, and we know it can be trained when people are involved in this. And we're talking a lot about research, and we're looking at video footage. What kind of advice would you give to someone to, if they want to focus on this and they want to use it in their real life? What would be kind of a key point you would say if you want to use this in reality, whether you're a teacher or a nurse or whatever it is you might be?
Got it. I've got several key points. First of course, is to improve your skills in being able to see them, because most people don't see micro expressions when they're occurring, or they see something but they don't know how to interpret it. So number one, improve your skill at reading them. You can do that by, this is not a plug, using our courses, using some courses to improve your skills in reading micro expressions. So that's number one. Number two, I don't believe in training people on a skill without giving them background knowledge of what to do with it. For me, that's just an unethical thing to do. I like operators, whatever field you operate in, that we train to have some background knowledge of why we're training it that way. And so I would encourage, number two, I would encourage everybody who improves their skills to also improve their knowledge of the background of facial expressions of emotion, the universality of that stuff, this discussion that we just had about micro expressions. Where does it come from? Why does it occur? Get some idea. Don't have to be a researcher, but we can all be scholars to some degree. And I think a scholar practitioner model or a scholar operator model always makes better operators, always. And so number two, I would get some background information like your courses and many of the things that you teach in terms of knowledge impartation. Then number three, I would get yourself involved in a coaching procedure where somebody who knows how to interpret these things can help you interpret them in your context. So for example, if you're training a physician to read micros in an intake interview of some sort, have somebody there you can talk to who can help you out to interpret what you're seeing, and think more deeply about how to interpret and evaluate what you're seeing and what to do and how to navigate in your realm. Because what you do with that is different if you're a physician or a nurse or a lawyer or a business person or a law enforcement officer. What you're doing is different. What you're seeing is the same and the knowledge is the same, but what you're doing is different. And so those are the three pillars that I would suggest: is get the knowledge, improve your skills, but get coaching with somebody who's familiar with going through that process and help you think that through. It's not an easy fix, but it makes way better practitioners if you're in this field.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So on that note, for people in this field, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that people might make when observing behavior of human beings?
Sure. When you say this field, do you mean people who have been trained in microexpressions or people who have not been trained?
So people that have been
because I
trained.
think there's different mistakes. I'm sorry.
What the behavior analyst, someone that analyzes behavior, wants to, as part of their, whether it's a law enforcement, whose job it is to analyze behavior and make decisions, high stakes potentially. What some of the biggest mistakes people might make in that situation?
Okay, but hold on now. Have they been trained in this area or not trained in this area?
They have been, well, if they've been trained, then theoretically they would, some of those biases and things wouldn't be there. So if they haven't been trained, then what are the biggest mistakes people make?
Okay. No, I think there are different biases for those two groups. So that's why I asked. So I'll answer both. If they haven't been trained, I think some of the biggest biases is that they will make interpretations of behavior that may not have the meaning they think. Because there's certain behavior. So my perspective on this is, we want to focus on behaviors that have been validated by science, but also vetted in the field to work, right? There are many behaviors, and one can just go online and use your favorite search engine and find body language experts. You got to see the quotes there that talk about all kinds of stuff, all kinds of behaviors, and have fancy labels for them and say all these things that you got to look for this and it'll tell you this and that stuff. And a lot of it, to me, I don't want to say junk, but a lot of it has either been shown not to be have a meaning or have not been tested. It's one of those two. And I prefer, so that's a big bias I think that untrained people have, that they latch onto something like looking away when a person is answering you is a sign of lying. That gaze aversion stuff. It's a huge myth. It's never been shown to be validated by any study. So that's the myth. Those are the kinds of myths for people who have not been trained by people like us. They're latching onto something that we would never latch onto. However, the people that we've trained, there are some biases there as well. One of the big bias, I think, is, you see the microexpression. They must be lying. They're guilty. Lock them up right now. And I think that's a bias also. Because I don't believe that any one behavioral indicator or verbal indicator, for that matter, is proof of deception. I think they're indicators, and I think they're signs of further engagement. And one of the things I think occurs in our field once we've trained people is they see it and say, aha, that's it. And I don't think it's it. I think it's a good road to it. But I think once one wants to get to it, it's telling you where the doors are and where they're opening. But I think the good operator needs to know how to go through that door. The microexpressions are opening the doors and telling you where the doors are. But the operator's got to go through the door and get the content out. And so if you look at shows like Lie to Me, where, gosh, what's his name? Cal Lightman says, aha, blah, blah, blah. So that's just not the way that works. And so I do think that there's that bias as well among people that we've trained. And so when we train people, of course, we want to work so that they don't have that bias, that they are more clinical in how they approach their observations.
Yeah. And I mean, you touched on it just there. And this is where I think we give you a lot of credit, as well as ourselves, to be completely modest, is we've kind of we've begun to shift it. Well, not shift, but we recognize it is about clusters. It is about multiple behaviors. Sure. And I think over the years, you are starting to see the people who may be focused on a particular area, like body language books have been sold for millennia. Everyone buys them, and they've always focused on eye gaze, foot direction,
Sure.
a lot of nonsense. And I think it's testament to the influence that the proper approach has been having, that you're starting to see this shift now where everyone's starting to talk about clusters. And this is now becoming the new norm, which you only had to wind back 7 to 10 years. And it wasn't the case. So the
Yep.
field as a whole has just completely moved in a new and better direction. And
Yep.
it's testament to people like you who are pushing it in that direction, I think.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, for whatever contributions I have, I'm part of the wheel that's going on, and maybe I'm one spoke in the wheel. But yeah, I think clusters, examining things in clusters, and again, not even just the nonverbals, right? The clusters, it can include verbal indicators as well, and those are just as equally important. Given that, I think micro expressions are special. I do think
Yeah.
micro expressions are special, and so I elevate them above, things, other kinds of indicators, but I don't think they're determinative. I do think they're still not yet determinative. I think they're above the rest, and I think micro expressions are very special because they're always signs that something is concealed in the mind. But just because somebody may be telling you a story and they show you a flash of fear or disgust or whatever it is, doesn't mean that it's about whatever they're lying about, right? It could be something else, and I see that enough to allow me to caution not making determinations off micros or anything else.
And if you were to remove micro expressions as a channel, is there another channel that you tend to hone into? Is there so if you put in facial expressions on the top pedestal, is the one below that you would say is actually probably the next in line as being a good indicator of how someone's thinking or feeling?
Yeah, so it depends upon whether we're including the words or not. I mean,
Yeah,
uh, research that has compared both or included both the analysis of the words along with the nonverbals, and I think we're some of the few. We produced some of the few studies that have done that across languages. But if you include the words, there are certain linguistic and grammatical features of speech that are occurring across languages that are equally important to facial expressions as uh, that are as equally important to equal importance to facial expressions. So those linguistic and grammatical features of speech, to me, share the pedestal with faces and micros. They share that pedestal. Within the nonverbal realm, the next level rung down for me would be in the gestures. The world of gestures, however, is huge, right? It could be hand gestures, face gestures, and body gestures, and those gestures could be of specific verbal content or speech illustrations. So there's a large world there as well. But the next rung after faces, for me, in the nonverbal world, are the gestures. If we include the words, to me, the linguistic and grammatical features of speech, along with the faces, are at equal par.
okay. And I mean, what we talk a lot about when we're talking about the actual verbal aspects is often differentiate the words, the way the words are communicated, and then the actual vocal tonality and volume.
Yes.
When you say the words, do you separate in that sense, or do you combine them into one?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just the words. You could make a transcript and do an analysis on the transcript. I think the vocalics and the paralanguage cues, the prosody, there's something else. And to tell you the
Yeah.
truth, I don't think that personally, and I don't think that research bears this out either. I don't think that the vocalics tell you anything more than faces do. Um, and so there's a lot of, for example, voice stress analysis for deception and whatnot. And I don't put too much credence in that background research. I think that there is new research showing that voices do different. Voices, when they're produced, can differentiate different emotions, which is great. But we can get that in the face already. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much additive value they have. You know, now if you're conducting an interview without the face, without vision, like on a telephone or something, sure, voices then replace the face to some degree, sure. But in most cases, when we're doing face-to-face interaction, I think I would spend more time looking at face and listening to the words. I think the voice, and then for me, it's gestures. Listening, analyzing voice to me is too distracting for me.
Yeah, I mean, we'd agree as far as focusing on the voice alone could be. Well, it is a mistake. Focusing on anything alone could be a mistake because context is always vitally important.
Sure.
I think where we've seen value is when you might be able to see a facial expression which kind of contradicts the tonality of a voice, and then within that context, it has its value.
Of course.
But completely agree. Anything on their own is it's not worth bothering with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, of course. You raise a good point. Um, what we're getting, especially in a face-to-face interaction, is what I call the total communication package. That
Yeah,
includes the content of the words, the features of the words, and then all the nonverbals. So you're exactly right. We're getting that entire package. Um, so yeah, I mean, of course, if you're looking at inconsistencies or contradictions among any of the components of the package, I think you're exactly right.
Excellent. I guess that one of the strong issues we have with words and vocalics is the fact that our world is much smaller than it used to be. So now we're engaging in communication and working with people, living with people that are far more diverse from a language point of view as well
Sure,
as
sure.
as every other reason. So, what what advice would you give if you are kind of analyzing somebody and you're in a cultural environment or a geographical environment that is not familiar to you? How would you adjust to the environment you're in when dealing with
Oh,
people in your country, for example?
oh my God, that's a great question. First of all, let's just assume that we're talking about an interview. First of all, before that interview, I would try to get some cultural knowledge. Some degree of functional cultural knowledge is good, especially about some of the gestures and the voice prosody, because people in different countries with different languages use their voices in different ways, in normally different ways, which we can then interpret as emotion or offensive or whatever, but that may just be the way they pronounce words, right? So I would get that kind of cultural knowledge first to begin with. Um, with or without that knowledge, if you're in an interview with a person who's very, very distinct, I would have, I would be interested, I would have the mind to be interested to learn from that person about what things mean and not make determinations. In fact, to tell you the truth, I think that's a good attitude for most interviewers, whether you're within the same culture and language or not, right? Be interested, project interest in learning more about what that means and get it from their perspective. So even when you encounter things that you may not know what that is, finding a way to get them to tell you more about it will give you more meaning. You develop a rapport. You build that relationship, and then you might find other cues that will help you assess credibility of what you're being told.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
So just to change directions a little bit,
Sure.
we've had this question in the past, and I'm sure you've had it too. Is what's the point? Why learn this stuff? Why even spend the time to figure out how better to read, understand, work with people? Artificial intelligence is going to figure that out soon. So why should I bother? Have you had any thoughts on that and how you feel about artificial intelligence and whether it will help, hinder, destroy human communication?
Absolutely. I don't know about the destroying the human communication part, but let's just say I know very well about all the various vision and audio technologies that exist to do what we do as human operators. I know of no technology that exists today that can do what a trained human can do. Number one. And thus, I always believe that the best computer or analytic processor, if you will, exists in our heads. And if I'm going to train somebody, I want to train that person. because there's no technology to rely on to do what we can do. So that's number one. Number two, about why we do what we're going to do. So listen, I have multiple thoughts about that. I mean, on one hand, there's no reason for us to be doing this because people in society in normal everyday life figure it out enough to read people enough, well enough, so that the species can survive. And I say that because our nonverbal behavior, our emotions, our cognitions, our bodies, our physiology, they're created in such a way that is allowing for, and we've evolved in certain ways that allow for the species to survive. And if we were not reading people well, even unconsciously, societies would not function. And the fact that societies are functioning means that we're kind of okay in terms of a survival of the species issue. So there's no reason to do all of this. On the other hand, we have people in professions who want to be better. I mean, if you don't want to be better, then I'm sorry, but I'm going to go and, I have a little tangent in my head. Once somebody asked an elder of mine about who is the president of the Japanese Budo Association, the Martial Arts Association, what is the purpose of doing all martial arts? And he said something profound to me that sticks to me to this day, which is the purpose of all of that is to live uniquely as only humans can do. If we're just eating, sleeping, doing or whatever else we do, we're not doing anything different than most other animals. But what can we do as humans? We can do many things. One of which is to continually improve ourselves, to make society better. So why do we do this? Why does your association or academy occur, and does HumanTel exist? And it's to help people who want to be better to get better at leveraging this science and knowledge base to help them be better in their lives, whether it's in their personal lives, their professional lives, as interviewers, whether, again, physicians, law enforcement, doesn't matter what the profession is, or it doesn't matter whether it's a personal enrichment. We're doing this because people can be better. And then there's a peripheral benefit for those who are working in who are working in certain fields like law enforcement, security, medicine, healthcare, wherever. They are helping others. And so we're able to make a contribution to society through this work, through leveraging this work. Yeah, you're right. For humans to survive and for population to continue, we could probably just roll it up right now and just go and have that pint. But we're here to help those who want to get better for whatever reason. And that's part of living uniquely as only humans can do. Otherwise, we just be living like animals. Boy, that was pretty deep. How that?
Brilliant.
That was amazing. Yeah, we'll definitely cut that bit out and just post it. And I mean, we're approaching the end of our talk, and I mean, I guess as one final question, and we were chatting about, what would our wrap-up question be? And we put it to you. We say, you have quite a few of these interviews. You speak quite a lot. Is there any question you've never been asked that you wish you had been?
See, I'm looking away. I'm not lying to you, okay? No, I don't know. I mean, I can't think of any right now, but will tell you what I have in my mind, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, of course, please.
I want to tell you how tickled and thrilled and privileged and honored I am to share this time with you. Your organization and mine have an interesting shared history. It's amazing to me that we can sit here and share some time like this and build our relationship and mutual respect. I for whatever it is worth. I hope and pray and that you are as extremely successful. Continue your success in everything that you're doing with all of the students and other people that you work with. This is a great field to be in because of the reasons that we've been talking about. If I can ever help, but I mean, you can't imagine. Well, you can. You probably can imagine the deep thoughts I have about the fact that we are here. And so I just hope that we can continue in some way, shape, or form to continue a collaboration of sorts on whatever level, even if it's only on the hypothetical pint in the future. So I want to thank you.
No, we're not settling for hypothetical pints. I mean, we're talking frosty pints on a sticky table. But the feeling is absolutely mutual. We absolutely love your work. We love you. It's been an absolute joy to have you on. And I know the students feel exactly the same. Like I say, we talk about you a lot on our programs. And I mean, it's an absolute privilege. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. Thank you.
And I mean, on that note, what we will be doing now to everyone sat at home watching is we'll end the show, and everything we've talked about and discussed today has been recorded. So we will upload that, make that available to you, and look forward to catching up with you all soon. So take care. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Bye.